for $8.99 a month for 39 months. Visit the Porsche Exchange in Highland Park or PorscheExchange.com. 8729 to signing. Excludes tax, title, license, and dock fee. No security deposit required. Expires 2/28/25.
WCPT 820, Chicago's progressive talk, where facts matter.
The following program, Collaboraction Radio, is sponsored by Collaboraction, and to the extent applicable, their guests. The views and opinions expressed therein do not necessarily reflect those of Heartland Signal, LLC, or its management.
Hello, and welcome to Collaboraction Radio. It is February 15th, 2025. And if you are listening, you are alive. I will stop with the Dr. Seuss. You're welcome. But I am delighted to welcome you to Collaboraction Radio here at the intersection, the six corners of Art Street, Activism Avenue, and social change. Thank you for joining us here on Collaboraction Radio on WCPT 820 AM, Chicago's progressive talk radio. We're also streaming live right now, on Facebook and WCPT.com, and will be available by demand very shortly on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, and everywhere else you get your digital content. And speaking of digital content, we're here with a digital content maker today. I am Anthony Mosley, and I'm the artistic director of Collaboraction, and we are a nearly 29-year-old nonprofit multimedia company. Our mission is to build knowledge, empathy, dialogue, and action. We call that KEDA. It's kind of like a martial art of social change. And we do that around oppression and inequity through theater, film, radio, live community events to leverage the power of storytelling and community to cultivate positive social change. Collaboration Radio is sponsored by the Joseph and Bessie Feinberg Foundation and AV Chicago, Chicago's leading provider of AV production and event management services. Also, we are supported by the Ruth Page Center for the Arts. The Ruth Page Center for the Arts is an esteemed dance program at 1016 North Dearborn. And they have all kinds of great dance classes, shows, programming. They're really a storied Chicago nonprofit. Check them out at ruthpage.org. And after the show today, if you feel impassioned and you want to join the conversation, email radio@collaboraction.org or go to www.collaboraction.org to learn more. You can send us a PSA or support the show, or better yet, you can pitch yourself. If you or someone you know or your organization is all about art, activism, and social change, we'd love to learn more. It's time for the Collaboration news and updates. It was a very big week. If you listen to the show regularly, you know that we are building a new space in the Kimball Art Center. We call it a house of belonging. And you may also know it took us a long time to get our building permit. And we had our official groundbreaking this week. It was great. And We had the city clerk of Chicago, Anna Valencia, there saying a few words. Alderperson Jesse Fuentes of the 26th Ward gave an incredible speech about how youth poetry and theater saved her life. And my co-leaders, CEO Darlene Jackson and COO Beverly Dines, said a few things. The whole affair was kicked off with a wonderful new poem from Montiera Davis. And I said a few words, and it was really great to get back together again. We left the Flatiron in December of 2020, and 4 years and 3 months. Who's counting? It was just, and we, it's been a great 4 years, and it really went fast in that kind of pandemic time travel kind of way. But theater's meant to be, we're meant to be in a room sharing time, space, and that is what we did this week, and it was fantastic. So, what does that mean? Well, it means that we popped a bunch of streamers. It was like confetti. We're already in construction with our friends at Oakwood Construction Services and the work of Cordigan Clark and Associates Architects, and we are putting together our space. So it's happening, y'all. Stay, on the Collaboraction social medias to follow along, and hopefully we'll see you at the space soon. It's over there at 1757 North Kimball, right off the 606. And today's guest is a neighbor of ours in the Kimball Arts Center, which I must say is filling up with really amazing people and artists and humans. And I'm going to talk about our esteemed guest in a moment here, but first I want to tell you about Tribute Loading, a Black History Month poetry slam that Collaboraction is producing tomorrow, actually, at the Silver Room in Hyde Park at 1 o'clock. And we have 8 poets who will be slamming some poetry, new pieces written about Black history from 2000 to today. We know there's a lot of work done about Black history from the 21st century, and we thought we would focus on the 21st. We have an incredible group of judges, Leslie Honore, Marvin Tate, and Sir Taylor of the Example Setters, and we have MC Mario Smith, who is a pillar of poetry and creativity down there in Hyde Park, and DJ Patricia of Chicago. So if you're not doing anything and you want to be a part of some Black history in the making, come on down to the Silver Room tomorrow. Next week on Collaboration Radio, we have Lori Branch, DJ Lori Branch, interviewed by Darlene Jackson, our CEO, also known as the Queen of Chicago house music. And these two amazing DJs are part of the trio known as the Good Girls. And Lori and Darlene are close friends. House music runs through their veins, not just their ears and their fingers and their eyes, but pumps through their heart, and they are going to be breaking it down, catching up, and talking about house music and Lori's amazing story. So tune in next week for that show, and let's get started with today's program, episode number 74. Wow. And just, I want to remind you, if you want to call in live and join the conversation, you can do that. You can call 773-763-WCPT. That's 773-763-WCPT, also known as 9278. On this episode of Collaboraction Radio, we're talking with Stacy Robinson, the artistic director of Kartemquin Films, Chicago's storied documentary film powerhouse. She's an award-winning filmmaker with 20 years of experience writing and producing documentaries for CNBC, OWN, PBS, and numerous cable networks. As a storyteller, she searches for the emotional soul of every story, no matter how big or how small the subject might seem. Most recently, she produced a 6-episode series for Disney Plus on a figure skating troupe from Harlem, which I think premiered last night.
It did.
Stacy also wrote and directed the Emmy Award-winning documentaries on Ida B. Wells and the birth of gospel music for WTTW PBS in Chicago. She's a winner of the Peter Lysager Award for Historical and Cultural Journalism. She told me I didn't have to read her whole bio, but I cut it down, but it's just so impressive. And, you know, it's nice to hear your bio every now and then and be reminded of all the amazing things she did, like receiving a National Emmy nomination for news and documentary for her work as a co-director of We Are Witnesses Chicago, in collaboration with Kartemquin Films and the Marshall Project. In the journalism landscape, Stacy has also written and produced an hour-long documentary film for Discovery Networks on the female doctors who provide health care inside Chicago's Cook County Jail. Stacy grew up in Claremont, California, and holds her bachelor's degree in fine art from the School of the Art Institute of Chicago, and now calls Chicago her home. Stacy, my neighbor at Kimball Arts Center, welcome to Collaboration Radio. It's so great to have you on the show.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Anthony. It's really nice to be here. And it's really nice to be your neighbor. I had the pleasure of being at the ground-breaking ceremony this week, and I have to say it brought more than one tear to my eye. It was so authentic and it was so inspiring. It is true. It is true that theater, like film, really is meant to be kind of enjoyed and seen in community. And I had that that expectation of like what's to come. I'm really excited for you all, and I'm really excited to be your neighbor.
Thank you. Yeah. Well, when our landlord told us the secret, we were, I think you would say we were psyched, and quickly started dreaming up an NEA application that you consented to be a partner on, and we sent in, and we sure hope there still is a NEA by the time the grants are announced. And we talk about that a lot here on WCPT. In the era of the 47th president, and today we're not going to do that. It's Saturday afternoon at 4 o'clock. Collaboration Radio is about activism and social change and art. And, you can't just be against something.
Right.
You got to be for something. And so let's be for learning about the career and the perspective and the work of this super established, esteemed filmmaker on the show today. Stacy, the first question I want to just ask is, when was the first time you even became aware of Kartemquin Films? Do you remember?
Oh, wow. I have kind of a funny connection to Kartemquin Films that really goes back quite a ways, because my oldest sister, as it turns out, was a schoolmate of Gordon Quinn, who was one of the founders of Kartemquin Films. So they actually were in at the University of Chicago. They were actually in a film club together. So I had heard about Kartemquin Films, but I didn't really know that much about the work they did. But of course, then I saw Hoop Dreams, was probably one of the first Kartemquin films that I saw back in the early 90s. That's when many of us became aware of Kartemquin. But it was years later when I met Gordon Quinn. I had already gone into the documentary film landscape. I met him. We were working at, I was working actually for the Rosie O'Donnell show for Harpo, and I went to dinner with Gordon and my sister, and he was telling me about Kartemquin, and I was very interested in the work that he had done. And I remember him saying to me at the time, he said, well, when you're done with this, messing around with this television, you can come on over to Kartemquin and do some work that really means something. I think something along those lines. But that's when I very first met him. And I didn't realize at the time that you really could just go to the house of Kartemquin Films and kind of knock on the door and introduce yourself. So it was...
And you had no idea that one day you would become when did you become the artistic director?
I became the artistic director in January, officially. So it's been about 2 months, really.
Oh, wow.
But before then, I've been the interim artistic director over the past year. And before then, I was on the board of directors, and I became chairman of the board. And then I became the interim artistic director, and now I am the artistic director. So it's it is most definitely one of those things that you walk in the door, and pretty soon you're doing more and more and more. And I think it's an organization that just kind of begets that kind of I think it inspires that sort of connection where you just want to do more. I really believed in the work, so I was happy to. I'm really excited to step into this role. I didn't realize how much I would enjoy it, but I really do.
And documentary filmmakers, they're an interesting, wonderful group of people. They remind me of playwrights a little bit, but they're different in that there's like a common thread of documentary filmmakers, I find. What is that thread, if I'm not mistaken?
Well, I think I think there is a common thread. I think to me, I think we're all storytellers, and all creatives want to share an experience. They're looking for a way to communicate, and maybe have an impact or make other people feel something. So I think that thread is really related. I started out as a painter and a fine arts major, and I don't actually feel like this visual field is that much different. It's still trying to express something that you really believe in, and you hope to inspire someone else, or that someone else, you can make someone feel or see something in that same unique way that you do. It's all about storytelling. So you're a storyteller, I'm a storyteller. I think that's the connection. And
do some of your films have scenes? For example, your film about Ida B. Wells has some recreations. So do you, as a painter, documentary filmmaker, do you do storyboards? Do you work? How does the painter background show up in your process today as a documentary filmmaker?
Well, I am a documentary filmmaker. I think that I really I do. The visuals play a very, very big part for me. I think of it as important as the writing in some ways. And I wasn't a writer by trade. I come from a family of writers. My father was a writer he was one of the founding editors for Ebony magazine here in Chicago. And he was a writer. My sister is a writer. But I never thought of myself as a writer. I always thought of myself as a painter. But I think so when I'm making a film, oftentimes what things look like, the visuals of something, to me, are as important as the writing, oftentimes. I know that the visuals can make people feel things. I really do enjoy what you refer to as like the recreations or the dramatizations. I think that they are, for me, it's just such a joy to do them, to really think about what a scene is going to look like. I don't necessarily storyboard, but I do probably do mood boards, and I know what I want things to look like, and I know what I want a scene to visually feel like, and the colors, and I love all that. And I love graphics too, so a lot of my work has a lot of graphics in it.
So, and what is the process of preparing or the beginning of mapping a documentary film? Is it different for every film depending on where it's coming from, or are there some things that are always the same? With a narrative film, you usually start with an idea, then you have an outline, then you write a screenplay, then you edit it a million times, then you throw it away and start over. But documentary film, it seems like to me, the palette is so broad that what's your process look like? Do you start with something you're excited about, or just depends how it gets to you, or?
Yeah, I really do. I think that's why in my bio I say, I try to approach a story, no matter how small or large it may seem, kind of from the same, looking for the kind of heartfelt elements of it. So I do try to find the soul of a story, but often it's a subject that interests me. More often now, as I've been where I am in my career, I try not to do any work that doesn't. I'm not sure I even could do something that I didn't really care about, but. I always admire people who just start with something that's just an idea, a creative idea, like in creative writing that they just thought up. I don't think that I have that kind of sensibility. So I definitely am someone who appreciates the research process, and then the story sort of starts to reveal itself to me. And that could come from people I talk to. A lot of times I reach out to many, many experts and writers and people involved, or if it's a character-driven story where the documentary is surrounding people and their personal story. That's where I really try to find the heart of the story. And then in somewhere along the way, the story just starts to become clear. And I'm sure that process is kind of similar to people who are writing something, from scratch, creatively from their head. The story starts to take on life of its own. And I think that happens in the documentary process. Sometimes the story starts to come to life on its own as you're out there filming, right? You're following someone around, you're learning more and more, you start to connect the dots, and then the story starts to take on a life of its own, really,
And there's that thing where it's hard to describe, but when it reveals itself and you know it, and it's a feeling, and often everybody on the project will know it, but it's this amazing thing that happens when, for theater making, with devised work, what I often talk about is you're kind of spinning two kind of wheels. One is content and one is form. The story and what's the frame, and then it'll all of a sudden lock in, and you just know it, and you don't know how you know it, but you know it. And I wonder, are there any projects that come to mind for you where that really became, a moment where you knew what you were going to do with a project?
Oh, that's a tough question, and I think I'm sure it's happened to me a number of times working through projects. I think that I did a story on I'm trying to think of something kind of recent, the birth of gospel, where I knew I was learning, and this is one of the great things about documentary filmmaking that I love so much. I'm very seldom an expert. I'm never an expert on any subject that I take on. It's an opportunity to learn absolutely everything. And then you just become entrenched in it. And so things are starting to reveal themselves all along. But I think I did a film on the birth of gospel, which I think is it's a very big and large subject to try to cover. But the idea was that kind of gospel music really, really took root in Chicago, and it was really part of this kind of great migration coming up from the South, and this mixture of, jazz and Southern blues and also Southern spirituals that all were here in Chicago at this perfect melting pot time, and it became what we think of as modern day black gospel music, really right here. And arguably, it really happened here in Chicago. So, but I think that story was so big, trying to find the heart of it, even though I could follow it on this migratory train up to Chicago. It was like, how was it going to get here? And it really became this idea of the train really actually started to become a really central part of the story. And it fit like with the music, and that kind of gave me this way of sort of opening up this story. And in the, I think it was a discovery of this really, really old song that had a train whistle in it, and it was an old kind of it wasn't really even it's not really a spiritual song, as it just is sort of like an old folk song from the South that had a train whistle in it. And when I found that piece of music in the National Archives, and I traveled followed the story from the South and to Chicago to migrate, that really gave me this sort of opening, and it became it sounds crazy, but I mean, it really became like this sort of musical motif that would lead me through to the rest of the story.
And do you remember when you found that song?
I do. I remember it. And I loved it. And I listened to it so much. And it's still on my computer. I wish I had it for you. I'll share it with you another time.
You have those private moments, and I find especially with nonfiction material, you do become an expert. And then you carry that with you to the next project. And then it all goes out of your head by the next project. If you ask me something now, I couldn't give you any of the stats now, but I could have, a year ago. You keep the important stuff and everything. Anything that's Googleable, you forget. So, Chicago, the home of gospel. Some would say jazz. Some would say blues, house music, Chicago hip hop. What is it? And the Great Migration and our history, but from your perspective, what is it that makes Chicago the place where these international, global art forms are born?
Wow. I think it's got to be a culmination of many things, It is a place where many people migrated so we have this melting pot of all these different nationalities and people from different backgrounds that settle here. I think it was situated in this sort of, this Rust Belt area in the middle of the country. It's just, I think it's really just become kind of a focal point for the rest of the nation. It's such a spot where so many people come, and it's different than, the East Coast or the West Coast in that I think it has always been a place where, it stays sort of distinctly a place where people can really distinctly retain kind of their original nationality and where they were from, but also kind of become part of this larger group where they're influenced by everybody else. I think that's different. I was actually raised and grew up in California, and California is very, very different than Chicago. It doesn't. Everything kind of becomes, when you live in California, even if you have, regardless of what your background is, you sort of become Californian. You take on this California, and I think the same becomes true of New York. And that's why Californians think that they are so, the best, and New Yorkers think they are the best. But Chicago, with all the neighborhoods that are involved, and all those neighborhoods kind of maintaining their own culture and their backgrounds, but then also sort of interacting and getting a little bit of all this other influence, I think that might be what it is. I don't know. What do you think it is?
Well, I do think that our history of inequity and redlining, segregation, the fact that the neighborhoods remained distinct, that, we didn't, it's like we're a melting pot that everything didn't quite melt all the way, we're not a queso dip, we're still chunks. And I think that we have a tale of two cities. We have this great international, magnificent mile, and then we have our neighborhoods that have been underserved and often, ignored. And I think that that combination and dichotomy is fertile ground for really powerful art and storytelling. And I think we have the greatest storytellers in the country. Comedians, and of course, real musicians, I think, are storytellers, even instrumentalists, So I think that's where it came from.
And people like Studs Terkel and stuff.
Yeah, Studs, and even, Carl Sandburg, and today Rick Kogan, and then we have the great Ida B. Wells. Yeah. So how did that project come together? Did you always think you might one day do something about Ida, or did it happen and you said, let's go? And what did she teach you? What did you learn from her?
Wow. No, let's be real. I did not always know about Ida B. Wells. As a matter of fact, growing up in California, I had never heard of Ida B. Wells. I've heard of people like Frederick Douglass and Harriet Tubman, but Ida B. Wells was never in any kind of school book or discussed in school or history, and not in college. And I can't remember, even as a Chicagoan, I was familiar with the Ida B. Wells homes without having really any familiarity with who Ida B. Wells was. In Chicago, it may have been a little bit different. People may have learned about her, been more likely to learn about her. I know that I'm not distinctly the only one. It's not because out of ignorance. It just was not. Her story was not well known. I remember learning more about her when I became kind of interested in the women's rights movement and the suffrage movement, and talking with my sister, and I were talking sometimes about what's up with Ida B. Wells? Wow, this woman's great. And we had talked about her, and I started to learn more about her. And then, of course, with the naming of the street, I think it was right around the time about the naming of the street. She was becoming more well known, and I had been talking with a producer, Dan Protest at WTTW, about doing a story with them, producing something with them. And he was asking me what kinds of things would interest me. And a couple months later, he said, what about Ida B. Wells? They're naming a street out of her. What would that interest you? And I jumped. I said, yes, I would be very interested in working with you. I think he was trying to actually get me to do a project with WTTW. And I was really excited to do it. But, Ida B. Wells' family, her Michelle Duster, her her descendants, Michelle Duster and Dan Duster, are the great grandchildren of Ida B. Wells. They have been working, and their mother worked for her whole lifetime to bring Ida's legacy to life. So in that story in particular, we never would have been able to do that documentary without Dan Duster and Michelle Duster, who were so gracious with sharing her time. They went through photographs. They became really a sort of a through line through the whole documentary to sort of dip back and learn more about Ida B. Wells. And they also provided, Ida B. Wells has a biography. I'd suggest anybody who's interested in her read it. It is terrific. But they really provided a through line to learning more about her as a woman, because she wasn't just sort of this iconic figure and hero. Of course she is, but and an activist, but she also was like a flesh and blood person. And when they told the family stories and shared pictures and shared those kinds of memories together, that's when you really start to realize how important, the importance of what she did. But it also makes her not seem like it brings a story to life. You have to find that narrative, that sort of like heart and soul of the story. And the soul of her story really was that she was a, she was a flesh and blood woman. She was a mother. She was a friend. And everything that, what I learned about her, you asked me about that. What I really learned about Ida B. Wells is that her heroism and her activism was always the result of something personally that happened to her, and it would activate her, which in some ways is really important to note, because it means that everyday people like you and I can take small steps to do tremendous and magnificent things. And that's what she did, every step of the way. She really became a spokesperson for anti-lynching. She started that crusade because one of her dearest friends was lynched. And she was not necessarily even against lynching before. She had a thought that kind of justice sometimes in her time, where there wasn't always like law enforcement or other things, that kind of lynching justice was something that she accepted. She was from the South. She thought maybe in some cases it was necessary. Had been ingrained in her thinking. But when someone that she knew, who was very innocent, who was an upstanding person in her community, was lynched, that she was her dearest friends, she was activated. So,
well, and that's similar to Mamie Till, of course.
Yes.
Who, as you and maybe some of our listeners know, Collaboraction worked on a story about Mamie Till and the trial of the murderers of Emmett. And, there's many great Black and Latinx Chicagoans who didn't really get their due when they were doing heroic things, because most of the media outlets were shockingly run by white men, and they focused their energy, their spotlight, their microphone on the activities of white men, which, if you are a filmmaker or theater artist or a writer, there is an amazing archaeological opportunity to go and excavate the history of the last 50, 100 years of this city or wherever you're at, to tell the stories that were missed by the powers that be. And Mamie also was, unbelievably underknown. And it's she said, I thought other people's business wasn't my business until it happened to me. And then I realized everybody's business is my business. And I do sure hope in this time, in documentary film and the work of Kartemquin is so critical to this, that people start to move beyond this, concept of me and towards a concept of we, and understand that, it's way better to be a little less wealthy in a great society than it is to be a little more wealthy in a troubled one. What's your assessment of the current state of documentary filmmaking?
Well, I think it's obviously it's a very difficult time in documentary filmmaking. It's a difficult time for the arts and creatives. I mean, I think we'd be remiss if we didn't, acknowledge that there's a lot of there's a real vile treachery, in the world today that we are kind of that we were up against. But historically, it has always been the creatives and the artists and the makers who get us through times like this. It's why Mahalia was the soundtrack of the civil rights movement, and it's why like Pablo Picasso's Guernica, really rattled fascism, and it's why like movies like Do the Right Thing and Hoop Dreams and Sugarcane, why they really they resonate in our collective soul. So I think that documentary filmmaking is incredibly important right now, just like all the arts are. I think that film can be a catalyst for change. I think that stories have the ability, and film has a ability to document what is happening. It has the ability to inspire action, and it has the ability to change people's thought and way of thinking, and it can inspire empathy. There's an undeniable truth, and this is what documentary often does, especially the narrative approach to documentaries that Kartemquin Films is really known for with Hoop Dreams. It's really they really kind of set the stage for that in many ways. But there's an undeniable truth to watching life simply unfold, right? You put yourself in someone else's shoes. You see a life that you change your perception of what it's like to grow up on the south side of Chicago and have a love for basketball. You learn more about what your neighbor who came here from another country to escape, injustices in their own homeland. You learn that they have many things in common with you and your own family, and they have the same belief structure in many ways, even if it's not the same. I think it's really important, and I think it's going to serve a place in our society that's even more important as we go through this time. I think we're going to see a crackdown on independent art and an attempt to replace it with propaganda art. I think that there's a real risk of that happening, and I think we've seen this playbook before.
And Kartemquin is a 501c3 nonprofit.
It is.
And if you value independent film, freedom of speech, we can push back by supporting the nonprofits and the artists that are, doing the work. A lot of people they feel, I think right now, some of our listeners feel helpless. And, find one nonprofit or a school or a community organization that aligns with your values and just consistently support them and become part of their community, rally others to join you. And if you are a lover of documentary films, Kartemquin has helped shape the current state of documentary films, not just in Chicago, but across the country. I mean, there's not many nonprofit documentary film studios in the country. There's nobody like Kartemquin. How many years is it?
Nearly 60 years. I know. It's amazing. It's amazing. It's one of the it has to be one of the longest, one of the most long-lived documentary production houses in the U.S. It has. Yeah.
Amazing. And just, I didn't realize that January you took the interim off of your title.
I did.
But
yeah.
what a great what a amazing moment that you are in the artistic director chair and helping projects come to life and guide the organization through this this unique time in history.
Thank you. It's an honor. It really is.
What else? Tell us about your film that premiered last night.
Oh, it's a series.
Series, sorry.
Yeah, no.
6 films.
It's a 5-part series that last night was the premiere. It's airing on Disney Plus, and I was one of the producers of a team of producers on the story. It's directed by Samantha Knowles and a leadership team, Gita Ganbir and Elisa Payne, that are great filmmakers. But it's the story. It follows a troupe of female ice skaters in Harlem. And so it's called Harlem Ice. And ice skating is not a traditionally, and they are all ice skaters of color. And ice skating is not historically or traditionally a African American or a sport that has much diversity. So it was incredible. These young women who enter the field of ice skating, not trying to necessarily assimilate. They're so professional, but they bring their own sensibility to it. They go out there and they skate to Beyonce, and they know they're very, very much aware of where they sit in the sport, and what they represent and the trail that they're blazing. And they range from age 7 to 17. And they were the most inspiring young women I think I've ever met. It was one of the favorite projects I've ever worked on.
And it's called Harlem Ice.
Harlem Ice, and it's on Disney Plus. And if you have, young people in your household, I'd suggest you sit down and watch them with it. It's really inspiring.
And what's next for you on the project slate?
Well, this past summer, I spent a lot of this summer working with a director named Phil Bertelsen. He was the director of a film called Who Killed Malcolm X that was on Netflix last year. But I've been working with him on I think I can talk about it, a documentary on Congressman Bobby Rush, who was former Black Panther here in Chicago congressman, one of the longest congressmen and statesmen in politics. And he's right here from Chicago. And so we've worked on a film. We're working on a film with him, and that film is in post right now. We went to the DNC with him. We went through. He gave us a tour of the South Side, and he is so our working title is Panther, Preacher, Politician, because he is all three of those things. It's really, really interesting life story.
So, and did you make it over to the United Center?
I did. It was touch and go. They didn't really. It was such a strange thing because the news could get in. It's you have to get the credentials to get in, and it's a level of what they want. So the news was in, and then they made this. For the first time ever, they decided that influencers, Instagram influencers, social media influencers were going to have access to the DNC. But documentarians and documentary film, they were like, we don't know exactly what it is that you are. Are you journalists? Are you? And we do very much fit in the journalism, right? We sit in the journalism field, but it was it was difficult to get in, and they finally let us in.
We a group of us got into night one. We were at the first night, and it was powerful. And in retrospect, now it's a little.
I know it's sad.
It's a little sad, but that's okay. So I believe that as a theater, person and an actor, director. I've done some TV and film, and I believe that documentary film has changed the form of acting. I believe that the rise of documentary film, the audience now knows what hyperrealism looks like, what non-acting, and actors strive to seem as if they're not acting, but before documentary film, really became, like, and of course this coincides with streaming, right? Where now thousands of documentary films are at your fingertips. You don't have to go to facets to see them. It's caused, film and TV acting to have to be more simple, nuanced, and less showy, and less what I would call pushing. You have to more pull the camera in rather than kind of. And it's interesting because social influencers, in a way, they are documentary filmmakers, though often putting the camera back at themselves. And we do have some great documentary filmmakers who do feature in their own work from time to time, but not normally. Normally like to be behind the camera. But it's an interesting time for digital content. Yeah. And the lines are being blurred. What does Kartemquin think about social media video content? Are you like, oh, that's just a marketing social media thing? Are you starting to say, there may one day be a great documentary film that is nothing but 50 posts on TikTok?
I think in the spirit of, documentary for democracy, the idea that everyone has a camera and can document something, I would say, bring it on. As long as, I think it's very powerful. And there's such a difference between like Vietnam and how the coverage that we got from Vietnam and what you would see in terms of the coverage from Gaza. And that's because people have, the ability right there on their phone. So, truth is hard to deny, like in that way. We'll see with AI and some other things that happen. But, I think for the way that Kartemquin has always approached documentary with this sort of cinematic social inquiry is what Gordon Quinn, who's a founder of Kartemquin, has always kind of referred to. The tenet of Kartemquin is the cinematic social inquiry. So that's there in I think in influencers, or just the idea that anybody can make a film, right? Or you can make a film on your phone. I think the danger is when if you don't have the same kind of journalistic integrity or the desire for the truth, or if you're not being careful about how you approach some of these stories, I think there's dangers in that. I think that there's more dangers in ethics and approach, and that's true anywhere.
And you work in the world sometimes of what is called cinema verite. And for those listeners that don't know what cinema verite is, will you describe it? And I'm thinking that maybe that even almost connects to some of these things about the hidden camera or the real lifeness of sometimes the cameras in Gaza, or but what is cinema verite and how is it showing up today?
Oh, Anthony, really.
I'm just trying to learn from you at this point.
You're going to embarrass me because it's cinema verite, which I use all the time. Is sort of like the idea of cinema. I'm not sure what exactly it's cinema very real, and it's sort of it is this this idea of the camera just following like hours and hours of footage where you follow just what's happening, right? You really see what's happening, but cinema verite, there would be an argument, and I have been on the receiving end of this, so I don't want to misspeak, but there is an argument that like cinema verite, we don't really see that much of it. It's become kind of a word that we use for this sort of just realistic filming, where we just like real film life unfolding. But documentary filmmakers are trying to prompt like certain issues and some things that they want to see. So that, whether that's like true cinema verite, but that's really what it is. And that's what you were kind of talking about when you were saying that you see so much of that more in narrative filming. That's like the camera angles and the rawness of it. And people don't want to see necessarily a staged set as much as they want to have the cameras kind of follow along. And that's the influence, I would say, of cinema verite. But documentaries are kind of influenced by cinema verite, for sure.
Well, thank you so much for coming on the show. Like I said, when I found out Kartemquin was going to be moving into the Kimball Arts Center, I got excited and I said, "Oh, maybe." When I got connected to you via email, I said maybe one day Stacy will come on Collaboration Radio. Yeah, and hopefully this is just the beginning.
So much fun. This has been so much fun. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Time just flew by.
Doesn't it? Doesn't it? I always say, I always feel a little better after the show, and I think it's probably adrenaline rush, but it's also the amazing guests that I am just absolutely privileged and honored to be able to chat with. So thank you for coming on. And folks, if you, is it kartemquinfilms.org? Is that what it is?
Yeah, Kartemquin Films.
Go to kartemquinfilms.org. There is a community of amazing Chicago filmmakers. And a lot of them are and have for nearly 60 years now cultivated work that is inspiring, new thoughts and feelings and change. And we need it more than ever right now. So dig in, watch some films. And if you like,
keep an eye out for films to come. We have several films coming out this year. So.
Anything you want to shout out?
Yeah. Sure. We have a film that's coming out that should come out this year called Traces of Home. That's one for sure. And I think you might be familiar with Kartemquin. And we have a film that we're working on right now with the Joffrey Ballet. It's still untitled. We have another untitled film called Untitled Scientist Project, right? That'll be out. So, but check out the website and you can see what's coming out and what we've done in the past. And it's pretty remarkable.
Well, that was a great show. Thank you. Tune in next week to Darlene Jackson interviewing Lori Branch. And have a great Saturday, everyone. We are here February 15th. We're in the second half of February. Before you know it, the days will get longer. The sun will come out. And it'll be a hot, sweaty Chicago summer. So enjoy the cool winter while we still have it.
The preceding program, Collaboraction Radio, was sponsored